You've written an excellent article, I have to say, in the Eye, which I read this morning. The fact is, you make it very clear here that Hamas's intention is very clear. It's total war with Israel using any means possible. The fact is they want to see Israel obliterated off the face of the earth.
Absolutely right. They want to ratchet this up. They just want to take this to another level. They want this to spill into East Jerusalem, into the West Bank, into southern Lebanon, bringing in Hezbollah, which, by the way, has far significant weapon systems, a more experienced armed force than Hamas does, and ultimately, potentially, Iran as well. They have no interest in looking after the plight of the Palestinians that are caught up in here. And I'm actually really pleased that President Biden is to visit the region. We should bear in mind that any presidential visit anywhere in the world usually takes months to organize, a lot of logistics, a lot of planning, a lot of security in place. He's dropped everything to get out there, and I think that's allowed more space for calmer minds to react and responsibly as to what we're going to do next. Absolutely right. Hamas has removed its claim to have any leadership in Gaza to represent the Palestinian people, but big questions there as to how, in an emergency perspective, what will take over the governance, the security, and of course the humanitarian challenge that we face here now. So I'm really pleased that President Biden is providing absolute support, standing with Israel as we are doing, but also asking these bigger questions, because how the next few days play out could have huge implications as to how this all unravels.
So obviously, Biden is instrumental in what happens from here. You also mention in your article it's important that we think operationally and strategically, considering not just being one move ahead, but being 4 or 5 moves ahead. The fact is that obviously Israel, we've talked a great deal about this ground incursion. We're now hearing from the Israeli military that actually it may not be a ground incursion. They may be planning a different form of attack or a different way to get revenge on Hamas. How much do you think is this due to Biden being involved?
I think it's given time. It's absolutely correct that we've now got more space for the Israeli strategists to look through the various options, but still keeping a very sharp aim on removing Hamas. But how can you do that without actually alienating the Palestinian people and indeed allowing this to escalate or indeed radicalization take place? We're already seeing that horrible event in Brussels. That easily could repeat itself elsewhere. You go back to, people are calling this Israel's 9/11. Go back to 2001, and sadly, we now look back and operational and strategic errors were made, however well-intentioned, in the name of defeating terrorism. So we need to perhaps learn from history, recognize this isn't just Israel's challenge. We should recognize this is a challenge for the Middle East. So all those that signed the Abraham Accords, we need Doha involved as well, the international organizations, and of course America and Britain as well.
So one of the other things you mentioned in your article is you say that Hamas is laying a trap for Israel. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, they've been planning this for an awful long time. They're backed by Iran. If you think of the weapon systems they use, the tactics that they deployed in taking hostages and so forth, they'll be prepared. They would have recognized that their barbarism will trigger a natural response, understandable response by the Israelis to launch that ground offensive. And urban warfare is the most difficult forms of combat. And going back to the point that Hamas cares little about the Palestinians, it's hiding amongst them. They would actually want to try and lure the Israelis to launch that invasion, and it will be a big trap with escalation very, very likely indeed. That's exactly what Hamas wants, to ratchet this up. And it bears in mind the fact that, who are the paymasters here? This is the Iranians. The Iranians have had such a proxy influence across the Middle East now for decades, and we've done very, very little about it. So any long-term plan, of course, there's some historical questions about governance and two-state solution and so forth, but we cannot get away from the fact that Iran is supporting Hezbollah in the north, is supporting Hamas, and has been supporting in Yemen as well, the Houthis in Yemen, and further afield. So bigger challenge as to what we're doing there. And the fact that we've got 2 US aircraft carrier groups going to the Middle East shows how tense the situation now is.
Well, of course, and this all is underpinned by the fact that Saudi Arabia was about to do a deal with Israel. Of course, as you say, Iran is the player that is likely to lose from this. So instability would be the name of the game for Iran.
Absolutely right. And perhaps this is the difference between this spike in activity, which is huge, the largest, arguably, since the formation of Israel and other conflicts in the past, the intifadas and so on, is the fact that we've had countries join Egypt and Jordan and accept the right of Israel to exist. Further than that, actually set up political and economic plans to work together. And that's the big change that we have here. So any future that Gaza, indeed the West Bank has, should involve those signatories, should involve those countries, those Muslim countries, because they have a stake, of course, as well. Big challenges ahead. We need to, rekindle our sense of international statecraft. My concern is that there are just too many alarm bells flashing on the global order dashboard. We've got things falling apart left, right, and center. The United Nations unable to cope with what's going on in Ukraine, what's going on in the Far East, the rise of China, and so forth. We're in a challenging period from a geopolitical perspective, and for things to ratchet out of control in the Middle East would really challenge the bandwidth of the West to be able to cope.
And of course, a ground incursion from Israel into Gaza would be so complicated. Miles of interconnected tunnels, booby-trapped tunnels, of course. And of course, you're fighting in a very densely urban populated area, aren't you?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And as I say, if Hamas is prepared for this, if they've got the weapon systems in to take on the conventional weapons and military kit that Israel is likely to use, the tanks, for example, using those tunnel systems, then the body count will simply ratchet up. And that is, as I say, will see this conflict escalate. It's not in our interest to see that happen because it will actually alienate more of the ordinary Palestinians involved here, causing a wider humanitarian conflict as well. So I'm really pleased that the president has stepped forward. I should also, we should mark out what the prime minister has done, because he's been speaking to various leaders in the Middle East, gauging the opinions there and the temperature, and urging restraints as well at this time, but standing by Israel, because I stress, Hamas has removed itself from the equation to have any right to represent the people of Gaza.
And of course, the Prime Minister was very swift in his condemnation. Yesterday, he called Hamas the attack a pogrom, a violent attack on a religious or ethnic group. Also, what do you make about this statement for Iran? As we know, it backs Hamas. It says it could take preemptive action against Israel in the coming hours. What sort of form might that take?
Well, we shouldn't be spooked by this language, but of course we should be concerned. But remember, this is the sort of language that Russia used involving when they're speaking about Ukraine. So I hope that the intelligence services are now working overtime to fully assess what Iran might be capable of. I think the first level of this, or where it could ratchet to, is in southern Lebanon. And I stress again that the military equipment that this power has, this is a regional power. Hezbollah operates and runs most of southern Lebanon, getting its equipment from Iran. It's got a land bridge there right across through Iraq and Syria. Therefore, it's far, far better armed than Hamas. For this to spill out in that area, opening up a new flank for Israel, it certainly would ratchet things up into a space that we must avoid.